Hi, I'm Adam Leftig. I run the product management group for Oracle GlassFish Server. This is the part 2 of our presentations where we're going to be talking about Active Cache for GlassFish, which is a new feature in 3.1. In this part 2, we're going to do a quick review of the feature set, and then we're going to dive into an actual demo, and I'll walk you through how you go about actually configuring an application for Active Cache. So, quick review. Active Cache in the 3.1 release entails an SPI-based integration for Coherence Web. And Coherence Web provides a number of deployment models, whether it's an in-process or you can run an out-of-process cache server, which is designed to help you scale out independent of your application server tier. It allows you to pick a variety of session models, which provide the actual application with a couple of features that allow you to either minimize the amount of memory due to large object graphs, or effectively provides a way of storing large attributes using a different topology than small attributes. Additionally, it provides you with some differentiated locking modes, whether you want member locking or effectively using the thread-based locking, which gives you the tightest or the safest locking mode. And then there's different ways of providing deployments where you have a application scoped, a coherence cluster, a web application scoped coherence cluster, or even a server scoped cluster. And then lastly, this notion of session attribute sharing allows you to effectively create different ways of sharing state across applications or not sharing state. So it allows you to basically have a notion of a global session across applications and even application servers. Okay. So given that, let's sort of dig into the details. And I encourage you to watch part 1 if you haven't done so already. So we'll go into detail on all these various features. Okay, so now I'm going to jump out of here and we'll dive into something like a IDE. But before we even get into the IDE and talk a bit about the application that I'm going to demonstrate here today, let's go about and actually start by creating a GlassFish cluster to host our application. So I'm currently in the GlassFish install directory /bin, and I'm going to go ahead and run the asadmin command to create a domain, and I'm going to create a cluster really quickly. This time I'm going to just call the cluster, or the domain rather, Active Cache, and this will basically, I'm going to take the defaults here. This is going to take a few seconds here to actually go create the domain on my disk here. Then we're going to actually create a cluster and put a couple instances in that cluster. And then we'll go ahead and start it up. So while I'm doing this, one of the things I'm going to show you is I built a sample application, which is a shopping cart that uses both Coherence Web as well as Oracle Coherence as a way of storing state, and Coherence Web, of course, for scaling out the HTTP session in this application. So now, before we go back to the app, let's go ahead and start the domain, and then we'll configure it. Okay, so the domain's going to go ahead and boot up. And then some of the things I'm going to do just to get the domain configured and ready to deal with Active Cache. Let's go ahead and use the console here by logging in to localhost 4848. And then what I'm going to do in this section is I'm actually going to go and create a new cluster, and then we'll actually take some of maybe a Julia Childs approach. I'm going to copy and paste some of the settings that we're going to use in here from a shell script that I create. Let's see here, almost. Okay, so now let's go about and create a new cluster by clicking on the cluster under the Common Tasks node. click New, and I'm just going to call this Shopping Cart Cluster. And I'll have it create a new config, which will make a copy here. Before I do that, I'm going to add a couple of instances. I'm going to add instance 1 here by clicking the New button. Oops. And another instance called instance 2. Okay, I'll give them an equal weight of 50. Okay, and I'm going to hit the OK button. Okay, so this is going to go ahead and create 2 instances. They're actually going to be on the same environment that I have here. And I'm going to wait for that. And OK. So now I'm going to go and drill into the shopping cart cluster config, which is the configuration that will be used for my cluster. And then I'm going to click on the JVM settings node. This is going to allow me to click on the JVM settings tab, and here I can add a couple of JVM options. So here I'm going to add the JVM options that I need in order to get Coherence Web up and running quickly. And the first one I'm going to add is this -d tangasol .coherence.wka. And this is well-known addressing. I'm not going to use multicast for member discovery. I'm actually just going to use a simple well-known addressing. Second thing I'm going to add here is the -d tangasol.coherence.localhost. Now what this does is it tells Coherence which interface, if I have in this case I have a multi-homed Mac, which interface to bind to. So that's effectively what the -d tangasol localhost, -d tangasol coherence localhost equals. Now I'm going to add a couple of options for storage. So I'm going to storage disable these members, and this means I don't want Coherence to store primary and backup cache data inside of the process. So this is tangasol.coherence, and this is stored in the config file. So each configuration could have a unique name. In this case, I'm using 2, so I'm going to have to create 2 entries. Distributed local storage, and I'll show you where this is in a minute, equals false. Okay, and then I'll show you where the other one is. Okay. So now I'm going to switch over to my IDE and show you the actual application, and we'll dig into the configs, and I'll show you where some of these get derived from as well. We're going to need one more entry in here as well. So let's click back. I'm running NetBeans here. You pick your favorite IDE. I just use NetBeans for because it's one of my favorites, and I also like the fact that it has great Maven integration. So here I have 4 projects that are Maven projects, and they're basically subdependencies of the larger project. Excuse me. So I'm going to start with the shopping cart web app. This is the project file, and in here I'm going to just sort of drill down into the webinf directory, and you'll see in here there's a couple of deployment descriptors. So if you remember from the first part, one of the things that you have to do to enable your web application is to take the proprietary deployment descriptor, either glassfish-web.xml or sunweb.xml, and provide the following XML stanza, which is the session config, and I'm just sort of uncommenting this out so you can see this from the IDE's perspective. There I have session-config, session manager, persistence type equals coherence web, and my context root is set to /shopping cart. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file. This is one of the things you have to do to enable coherence web. Then the other thing, if you remember from part 1, is to effectively take the coherence.jar and the coherence web SPI jar and package it with your web application. In this case, I'm going to use the Maven POM system, or if you're not familiar with Maven, I encourage you to dig into it, to provide the build infrastructure to include the right dependencies. So here, what I'm going to do is uncomment out this stanza, which is effectively going to allow Coherence Web to be packaged as part of the application. The scope is compile. This is the name of the library, and I manually installed the Oracle Coherence Web GlassFish-SPI jars into my local Maven repository because they're not provided on a public repository. And then here I have a dependency on Oracle Coherence 3.7, and I'm effectively going to change this from provided to compile. And what this is going to do is I'm going to include the coherence jar inside of my web application or web info-lib directory. Okay, so I'm now saving this POM, and what this is effectively going to do again is going to create a web info-lib directory that includes the Oracle Coherence jar and the Oracle Coherence Web SPI. And again, I had to manually install these with Maven into my local repository. Okay. Now, the configuration file is actually really important as well. One of the things that's required is to include the coherence cache configuration or the session cache config, which comes with coherence. And this contains the topology for the actual storage of the caches. And here you'll see the look of the standard session cache config, which comes out of the box with Coherence Web. And what I've done is I've moved it into a file called coherence-cache config and packaged it with my web application. And in here you'll see the system properties that I'm going to use for enabling storage. And so here there's Tangosolid-coherence session local storage, which is default false. And again, there's another one down here again for session local storage. Okay, so this is for the session base, and I use the same property for my store base configuration. Okay, so I'm using the base session cache configuration that comes out of the box, and I've added a new cache called store cache, which I'm going to use in a servlet in my application. So I had to effectively take the session cache config and merge it into this file, and I've called it coherence-cache config. Now, out of the box, Coherence will try and locate via the current class loader for the cluster service by asking for the resource called coherence-cache config.xml. So I don't need to provide any additional configuration. Had I used a different name for the cache config, I would have needed to have put that as a system property. Okay. Now, if I were to change this value here to be distributed, which I will do, okay, that then means I need an additional storage enabled distributed equals true flag enabled. Okay. So now I'm going to take this one, copy it. I'm going to go back to my GlassFish server configuration, and here you'll see I'm going to just sort of paste this in here and set this equal to false. The default is false, but I like to put them in there explicitly so that I can toggle them without having to restart the server. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I have a set of configurations for coherence now, and you'll see the admin console is basically going to store these inside of the shopping cart cluster config persistently. Now I'm going to use mod JK as a means of load balancing between my cluster because I'm on a Mac and I don't have a version of iPlanet web server to load balance. But the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to just use the embedded Apache 2 server that comes installed with the Mac OS 10. And I've already done the sort of Julia Childs approach of making the edits, but I'll walk you through them. On the Mac, it's the Apache configuration is in etc Apache httpd.conf, and I'm going to add 2 mount points here. You have to sudo to edit this file, and I'll just walk you through real quick. I've included everything under etc Apache 2 other star.conf, and that is where I have my Apache mod JK configuration. So I'm going to go into other, and I believe I created a file called modjk.conf. And in there I have a number of entries. So here I've loaded the module, modjk. I've defined the workers file, which I'll walk you through in a second. I set the log file, the log level, as well as the timestamps for the log format. I'm going to forward the key size and the URI compatibility, and I'm not going to forward directory information to the server. And then the most important bit here is the JK mounts. And here I'm mounting the following URIs: the /shopping-cart, which is my context path defined in my glassfish-web XML in my ear file, and my JK mount here for the /* everything after the shopping cart URI. It's going to go to load balancer, and load balancer, of course, is defined in the worker's properties, which I'll show you real quick. Here in the workers.properties, one of the things you have to add is a list of workers. And so here I have worker 1 and 2 and load balancer, and effectively what this provides is a list of ports. Worker 1 is on 2880 and 2881, and on for worker 2. And this is effectively the list of nodes that I'm going to set. And I've also enabled sticky sessions. Okay, and this has to live on both sides of the Apache side as well as on the GlassFish side. So I'm going to add a few more -d parameters. And sort of just save time and use my Julia Childs approach, I'm going to go back to my IDE. Under my cache server project, I created a set of shell scripts that could pre-configure the server so that I didn't have to go and recreate this over and over. Or if I wanted to recreate it over and over, I didn't have to type it all in. So I'm just going to copy and paste these values out. So the first one is the JVM host. This system property is going to provide the information to the runtime to honor the route that I just defined, which was part of the worker.properties, and then I need to actually provide the worker.properties in there as well. And that is through the system property -d ComSun Enterprise Web Connector enabled jk.property file, and in there's a worker.properties. So this really has nothing to do with Coherence Web yet, but it's just providing a mod JK based load balancer so that we can see the behavior. This is all documented in our product documentation, so I'm not going to spend too much more time on it. So I'm going to go ahead and save these. Okay. And then the last thing I want to do is I'm going to enable the Ajp Listeners on my network endpoint. So under the network configuration, there's a Network Listeners tab, and the Ajp Listener is the one that's used for non-SSL traffic. And I'm going to go ahead and select the JK Listener enabled. And what this does is it basically tells this port to listen for AJP requests or Apache Java Protocol requests as opposed to regular HTTP requests. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I think we're all set. So now I've got all my configuration. I'm ready to go. I just need to package my application, deploy it to GlassFish, and we should be good off to the races. So now that I've made all these configurations, I have to start the cluster. One thing you want to make sure to do is if you've made changes while the cluster was running, then you want to make sure that you restart the cluster, because Jvm Options require a restart because they get passed to the process. So this will take a few seconds. So while this is starting up, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my IDE here, and we'll go ahead and close this guy down. Okay. Now let's go and dig a little bit into the application. So there's a couple of servlets here that I want to talk a bit about, and so I'm going to just go in here. And one of the things I did that's a little different from just simple Coherence Web, I've also used some features that are part of the Coherence API directly. So for example, under the View Shopping Cart servlet, you'll see in here I'm generating some HTML. But one of the things I'll point out is when you actually view the shopping cart, I go out to the store cache. So I've created a new cache entry, and the way you get a handle to a cache is you call the cache factory get cache, and you pass in the name of the store cache. And you saw earlier in my cache configuration file that I had the name of the store cache defined using a near cache strategy. So now I have a reference to the cache, and what I'm doing is I'm asking for a entry called shopping cart item for a given ID. And what this is going to do is going to give me the store interest. And really what I'm doing is I'm tracking the number of times an item has been sold so that the user can see how popular the item is that the user just bought. Okay. So this is sort of the read side operation where I ask the store cache for the item by an ID, and I use the item ID as the primary key of the named cache. And so now let's go look at the shopping cart itself, and you'll see in here there's an attribute that's keeping track of shopping cart items. And so for every time a user buys something, a new shopping cart item gets added. Now what's really interesting here is, again, you'll see a reference at the top of the file to that same store cache I just showed you in the read operation. And in here, what we're doing is, if you go down to line 69, you'll see I'm creating a filter. And in the filter, I'm saying anytime an instance is available, or an instance of this shopping cart item is available, I want you to put a not filter, meaning that I'm negating it. So to translate this, the way you can think about it is, if the instance is not available, I want you to put it into the cache. And that's why you see this new conditional put, and you pass in the filter, which is a not filter, and then the actual instance. And so what this will do is it'll provide the instance in the cache only if it doesn't exist. Now, the next important bit is line 73. Now in there, I'm using a entry processor to increment the attribute store interest on the object shopping cart item by 1. And that's this store interest argument, and 1 is the number by which I want to increment. And I'm invoking this on the store cache whose ID is equal to the ID that I just purchased. And so every time the user clicks on the add item to their shopping cart, it's incrementing the global count of the number of times that the users actually purchased this item, or any user in the system's purchased the item. And this is using entry processors. So here I just wanted to show how you can mix Coherence Web with an Active Cache for GlassFish with the Coherence APIs directly. And so you sort of have a balance of creating your own custom configuration, merging it with the application's configuration, and you're off to the races. Okay? So now that I've sort of given you a quick overview of the application, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to go ahead and package this by running my Maven commands. So I have the project root here. So I'll just do a quick ls. You can see my POM file. And I'm going to run an mvn clean and an mvn install phases. So this should basically provide my application packaging. Now, one of the things that I did, and I sort of alluded to earlier, was this idea of providing a special project for hosting the cache server itself. And in there I have a set of shell scripts that I'll walk you through. So you can see that my build was successful with Maven, denoted by the success here. And now let's go and dig into this shell script called start cache server, which is part of my storage enabled cache server process. And this shell script I wrote basically starts up a default cache server and uses the configuration that I defined on the same WK addressing that I used in my application. Okay. And so I use this Maven as a way of generating the shell script as well, so that I keep everything in sync. Additionally, I provide some command line options that I want started every time I start a cache server. Okay, and I even tell the cache server what I want to be called in JMX as well. Okay, so these properties are shared across my build. So now let's go ahead and we're going to actually start one of these shell scripts. So I'm going to go dig into this directory here. You can see this is the project cache _ server, and in the bin directory, whoops, I think I'm cd into my bin here. I'm going to just call shell start cache server. And you'll see this is your first, for some of you, probably the first time you've ever seen a cache server start. And it's a JSE, so I'm just calling Java and I'm passing in the default cache server. One thing to remember is I provided, because I'm using an entry processor, I provided the classes for the model, the shopping cart item themselves, because those actually get executed or deserialized on the process side. Okay, so you have to provide those in the class path anytime you use a entry processor or anything that executes on the storage-enabled servers, cache servers. Okay, so now we're ready to actually deploy our ear file. So I'm going to go to the back to the GlassFish cluster in the admin console, and let's go ahead and click on the cluster on the application subtab, and let's deploy the ear file. Okay, so I'm going to select the ear file, and it should be under my projects directory, coherence SPI, and the ear file should be under target shopping cart ear. Okay, I'm going to enable availability as well, just so that the proxy plugins work correctly, or the ModJK plugins work correctly, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And you'll see it's deploying the application now. This will take a few seconds. Now, if you see, I'm going back to my shopping cart cluster, or sorry, my storage-enabled cache server. You should see once that the application deploys that members of the cluster actually join join the cluster, and you'll see that here outputted that multiple members have just come into the cluster, and you can see that they're joining. Okay. Now what we're going to do is actually test the application. One thing we do have to do is actually restart our Apache instance, just to make sure that the sockets are cleared out here. CTL restart. Since I edited the files. Okay. Now let's go ahead and give it a run. So I have the web servers running on port 80, so I'm going to just go ahead and hit localhost, and it should be shopping cart. There it is. Welcome. And voila, there I am. I'm already in the shopping cart application. So now let's go shopping. So I'm going to click on the Go Shopping tab here, and I'm just going to add a few items to my cart. How about a box of pens? Let's add something new here. Package of 500 sheets of multi-purpose paper. And now let's go view my shopping cart. Okay. So I have a couple of items, the items reflected. You can see here this is the total number of items sold on Disney World. That was using the entry processor that we talked about. Now, one thing you can do as well is actually, I'll start another session using another web browser to see what happens when you actually add a couple more items here. I'm going to go shopping. Let's add a multi-purpose paper. So now we have 2 sessions, and he has this, and sure enough, you'll see that the total number sold on Disney World has grown. If I go back to the home page and view the shopping cart, this has also been modified. So that is being stored in a named cache that I created, and I'm incrementing programmatically again, so you can see it here. Now, pretty neat, right? So this is what happens when it works. Now, the way I really like to show the power of Coherence Web, or Active Cache for GlassFish running on Coherence, is I actually will kill the entire GlassFish runtime and bring it back up, and you'll see that the state is still maintained. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to just go ahead and let's launch JConsole real quick, so we can get the right process IDs here. So you can see I have 3 instances running of GlassFish. One is running the domain admin. The other 3 processes here, and then we have our storage-enabled cache server. I'm going to go ahead and connect to the cache server. And one of the things you'll see in here, by clicking on the mbeans tab, there's a coherence domain, and that's because I've enabled the coherence mbeans. And inside of there, you'll see an mbean called the HTTP Session Manager. And there's two of them. There's one per container instance. And in there, you can see the attributes. And in these attributes, you'll see that the number of sessions, the various settings that we've talked about over the number of the last session as well as in this one, you'll see here that the session has been updated 4 times. This is the overflow threshold. This is the name of the overflow cache, and the cache names, which sort of talks about the underlying topology. Okay, so this gives you some visibility into what's going on in addition to metrics around what's happening in the cluster. And you can see this as well on the other storage. One of the cool things you can see is the actual size of the session averages on each member. So you can see it's about 594 for the max size, and then the min. The average on this instance is 301. Looks like on this one it's 529. Okay, pretty cool, huh? Now let's go about and we'll go actually shut down the entire cluster. I'll just do it clean. You could kill it too if you want. It doesn't really matter. But I'm gonna just go ahead and stop it from here so it's easy to restart and I don't accidentally kill a process. But once you, if you want to actually see what it looks like when you actually kill the instance, you can do that as well. Okay. So now both of these instances are dead. Just to show you that, I'm going to try and go home, and you'll see that the temporarily unavailable message is up. Now let's bring the cluster back online. And once the cluster is back up, my shopping carts are going to be maintained. And the reason why is I've stored all the state in this external process, or on this JVM running a storage-enabled cache server, and none of the HTTP session data or my custom cache data is actually stored on the same server. Although it uses a local cache copy in order to prevent frequent reads or frequent faults on remote data requests. Okay, so once this is back up, you can sort of see the power of Coherence Web here. Okay, I can see that the members are joining. That gives me a pretty good indication that they're up, and sure enough they are. So let's go ahead and refresh here. Now the cluster's back up and running. Let's view my shopping cart, and sure enough I still have $6.99 of my multi-purpose paper from this client. And let's go back to him. Whoops. Let's go see his shopping cart. And sure enough, his shopping cart's maintained. Pretty neat, huh? So, you know, I showed you effectively one of the powers of Coherence Web, which is, you know, effectively removing the entire life cycle of the application tier, and it's completely divorced from the actual storage of your state information, which lives on a completely isolated tier in these storage-enabled cache members, which you see here. So anyway, this concludes the second part as well as the series for Active Cache for GlassFish, and I hope you all enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is adam.leftik, L-E-F-T-I-K, @oracle.com if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoyed it.